concept of place has been the focus of much research within the social sciences, and indeed beyond for many decades. And it is a relatively contentious concept because, as Tim Creswell's explained, place is everywhere, and it is a word that seems to speak for itself. By the simplest definition, it retains a geographic connotation as a portion of geographic space, though within the social sciences at least, it is more commonly accepted that places are spaces which people have made meaningful. Such meanings can derive from a range of stimuli. Seppi, for one, argue that places consist of 5 sensory stimuli: visual, audio, scent, taste, and tactility, each influenced by local, religious, and political identities, as well as other cultural motivations. This reflects the many different philosophical approaches taken in the studies of place to date, which, for the most part, can be broadly categorized into phenomenology and epistemology. A phenomenological approach to place focuses on its being, while an epistemological one concentrates on the origin of the concept and theory of place. Both continue to feature prominently in contemporary research into place. Several concepts associated to place have also been brought forth in academic discussions. And of special note to this paper are placelessness and place identity. There has been much critique about how placelessness is conceived, defined, and understood in its 1970s origin, including from Ralph himself, of course. But I would like to focus my exploration today on its earliest form. So going back to place and placelessness, the idea of placelessness itself can be broadly defined as places that lack a sense of authenticity, distinctiveness, and connection. And according to Calhoun, placeless non-places are then sites of impersonal anonymity and have an overall rather negative connotation of blandness and kitsch. But as I have argued elsewhere, however, qualities of placeless non-places, especially the anonymity that they offer, need not necessarily be received purely in a negative manner. That in certain cases, in this case is an estate renewal, they may even be received positively. In that case, a more placeless identity facilitated the disassociation from a stigmatized past that, for some residents at least, was a very welcomed relief. Taking a popular view and incorporating those of Sennett's and Castell's, Calhoun went on further and discussed the functional segregation of our cities, exacerbated by suburbanization and globalization, amongst other processes, in the increasing presence of places non-places. As such, many urban spaces around the world can now be distinguished semiotically only in arbitrary ways. So as many cities worldwide push towards densification as a strategy in arresting urban's role and redirecting it vertically, is the age of functional segregation coming to an end as we head towards the age of non-distinguishable cities? And with densification, is there a need for multifunctional spaces, whether created intentionally or unintentionally, to cater for a more mixed population within a smaller confine? And if so, would these multifunctional spaces contribute in a different way to cities' loss of distinctiveness, and therefore creating places non-places through a different mean, or would it, through non-intentions, bring about new ideas of complexity and diversity away from placelessness? So Kate explained, I have a background in cultural geography, so identity is often on the forefront of my focus. Referring specifically to human identities, Judith Butler's book, Gender Troubles, was and still is a seminal work in this field. Without going into too much detail here, Butler explained identities as being made up of performatives, both voluntary and involuntary performances that overall as a collective presents themselves to what we understand to be an identity. As performances, we are bound to repeat, though never to the exact same again. So identities as such are constantly mutating through each iteration, while the core remains relatively constant. Identities are also about how we are perceived by others, And these perceptions are influenced by expressions of local, religious, political, and cultural motivations, as well as modes of behavior and taste. All these influences how we voluntarily, though at times it may feel we are involuntarily pressured to, change our performances. In everyday terms, however, people don't tend to have such a fluid understanding of their identities, and instead view them as relatively static, so that in this perspective, people have multiple overlapping identities that interact but also replace each other over time, rather than, as according to Butler, having different dimensions of identities that are part of one fluid and constantly evolving continuum. Discussions pertaining to human identities, such as Butler's, are seldom applied to places. For one, unlike human identities, place identities lack the aspect of voluntary expressions, so that any mutation in place identities are externally applied, such as through deliberate acts of rebranding and renewal. And as such, there is the view where place identities are relatively more rigid and static than human ones. And indeed, as Duffy explained, places are identified with what does not change, and are experienced primarily in terms of stabilized contexts of everyday life. Though he also conceded that places are in states of becoming, and as such, like human identities, are also constantly evolving. Further, following Mlodinov, the maintenance of human and place identities may be more similar than commonly accepted, where human identities are far more readily influenced by external factors than previously recognized. So given such similarities, then perhaps those theories of human identities about their fluidity as put forward by Butler can also be read in the context of place identities. This is especially so in view of Creswell's recognition that places are social constructs, and that to say something is socially constructed is to say that it is within human power to change it. If place identities are indeed fluid rather than static, can places lose their identity? If Butler's understanding of people, that identities cannot be replaced or lost, rather just evolve, can places truly become placeless? So I'll try to answer these questions in the context of public toilets. So public toilets, as most people will understand, are designed for very specific purposes. They are for relieving particular bodily urges and are more or less designed for single-gender uses, signified very literally by signs and symbols. Though significant to our day-to-day lives, public toilets are often hidden away out of view and not usually talked about. But nonetheless, the identities as designated places are very clear. Mostly functional by design, they are often generically non-distinctive, except maybe by scent, and extraordinary places, except for people like me who go about taking pictures outside and inside them. Again, novelty has begun to be incorporated into some public toilets, catering particularly to the male users. As a place, public toilets straddle the invisible line between what is considered public and private, where as a public space, they can be accessed by anyone, so long as they are of the correct gender. But once a cubicle door is closed, a level of visual privacy is gained. The individual cubicles, while offering privacy, also discourage connectivity amongst users by visually and physically, though not usually audibly but scent-wise, separating one from others. While habitually, some may visit and use such toilet facilities in small groups, overall, they are generally places for the individual. Despite such sterile and disconnecting intentions, public toilets have also historically been places for same-sex attracted persons, especially men, to seek erotic encounters. Such an alternative use of public toilets has featured more prominently in academic discussions regarding spatiality and identity, particularly in challenging the heteronormative discourse. One meaning in which same-sex attracted persons seek erotic encounters in public toilets is through lachinalia, so there are graffiti found inside public toilets. Much like academic discussions pertaining to the place of public toilets, there are limited examples of lachinalia, or graffiti in general, being used for research purposes, partly because of the negative connotations as a social problem, as vandalism, or as a visible obscenity, where strategies are often devised to clean up or to discourage their occurrence. While some social sciences works have highlighted graffiti's role in symbolizing territoriality, others suggest graffiti writing as a gendered cultural practice that operates as an often hidden forum of communication, especially amongst members of marginalized groups. So this comes from work that I did as part of my PhD way back when, in 2005. In all, 95 toilets were accessed across 14 university campuses and 4 public parklands throughout metropolitan Sydney. This included 42 males, 41 female, 11 non-sex or gender-specific disabled toilets, and 1 family room. A total of 136 distinctive latrinalia entries were recorded photographically from just 10 of the male toilets and 1 female toilet. The aims of visiting these public toilets were to ascertain the presence of latrinalia, especially those which contain content pertaining non-heterosexual subject matter, to explore how such latrinalia function as a form of clandestine communication, and to examine how such latrinalia reflect the identities of their writers or drawers, particularly in relation to their conceptualization of public-private spaces and their place in society. Some of these facilities have been revisited in the years since, though not always with the same purpose in scrutinizing their latrinalia. The content of latrinalia is written by men who experience same-sex attraction can be erotic, romantic, social, and anti-homophobic in nature. To these same-sex attracted men who use latrinalia as a communication, the identity of public toilets thus extends beyond simply functional hygiene, though that originally intended identity still remains. To them, public toilets may be a place for sexual encounters or for organizing such encounters, a social place, a place for performing a usually more hidden side of their identities, in addition to as a place for maintaining hygiene. Such multi-dimensional extensions to the identity of the public toilets thus give some of them a distinction apart from most others. Most importantly, the presence of such latrinalia challenged the more conventional heteronormative assumption of public toilet identities, public space identities, by articulating different types of male-to-male interactions that is not commonly associated with these places, even though the interactions mentioned may not necessarily occur in them. In response, there is evidence of other users as well as the authorities responsible for these public toilets in deterring same-sex interactions and attempting to establish and restore a presumed heteronormative identity and their core identity for maintaining hygiene. Many strategies have been employed to detract and prevent their existence, from pointing out their out-of-placeness, spraying multicolored patterns to reduce legible spaces, use of glazed tiles, making graffiti writing difficult and cleaning up easy, and imposing conditions of entry. Failing this, more drastic measures were taken, including restricting access, and in one extreme example, such as this one, demolishing it all after all other strategies have failed. A note on this, now demolished public toilet block. There was almost a complete absence of latrinalia pertaining to natures other than sexual solicitation found in this block when I first visited back in 2005. The demolition occurred around the time a new children's court, which you can see, the construction bits happening back here, where I'm up to, was opened directly across the road. Another toilet block of the same park, where again almost all latrinalia found were of sexual solicitation, was however not demolished, mostly because it was built as part of the foundation of an amphitheater, though access to it was severely more restricted when this one, shown here, was demolished. With the advancement in mobile technologies and increasing popularity of geosocial networking applications such as Grindr and Tinder, the place of latrinalia as a hidden communication has waned. A reassessment of the 11, excluding the female one, because I didn't go in there, of the same public toilets this year yielded less than a handful of such latrinalia compared to the 106 found back in 2005, though evidence of latrinalia of other nature still existed. So to sum up, as presented here today, the presence of latrinalia can alter the mostly functional identity of public toilets, places that are generally not wildly distinctive one from the other, though the core identity of these places as public toilets still remains. The presence of these latrinalia provides some public toilets a distinctiveness over other similar places. At the same time, they also highlight a level of connection not generally associated with the places. They are for most part not mass-produced, bringing about a level of authenticity. On this counts, latrinalia brings certain public toilets away from considerations of places, non-places. Their presence, however, also challenges conventional heteronormative assumption of public spaces, and efforts are often made to removing the distinctive identities or reputations that latrinalia may bring. In his discussion of West Hollywood, Ben Forrest discussed the importance of visuals in reconfiguring place identities. The presence of these latrinalia in the public toilets is as much a visual thing as the shop fronts and the cultural activities in Forrest's discussions, but perhaps it is the subject matter and the objective contradictions of his approach that see latrinalia fail to re-identify these places as anything other than just public toilets. People and places are obviously very different, but inextricably linked things. But indeed, their identities can similarly be understood from a more fluid ideological perspective, and especially when we look more closely at a micro-performance space scale, places' identities might be harder to come by than one might think. Going back to the questions that I posed earlier, of whether multifunctional places contribute to a loss of distinctiveness and therefore towards placenesses, or do they bring about new levels of complexity and diversity and therefore away from placenesses? Perhaps these two things are not polar opposite and can shift from one to the other seemingly quite fluidly. But recognizing the fluidity of that continuum, we may be some way from it still. That's all.